The mining colony of Kalon-7 clung to the side of a vast crimson canyon like a metal insect refusing to be blown away by the planet's endless winds. Above the settlement, 3 moons drifted across a violet sky while cargo shuttles moved between orbit and the surface, carrying refined crystal or worth fortunes across civilized space. Ethan Cole stood on top of a malfunctioning survey drone hanging upside down from a communications tower. "I admire your determination," he told the drone. "Most machines quit after becoming upside down." The drone responded by dropping directly onto his shoulder. "Fair point," a nearby technician burst out laughing. Life on Kalon-7 was usually quiet. Dangerous, certainly, but predictable. That changed the moment the Royal Fleet arrived. The alert spread through the colony in seconds. The Queen of Illyria was coming. Workers abandoned lunch tables. Pilots rushed toward observation decks. Even the mining supervisors stopped arguing long enough to watch the skies. Dozens of silver starships emerged from orbit, descending through the clouds in perfect formation. Their polished hulls reflected sunlight across the canyon walls, turning the entire valley into a sea of dancing light. At the center of the fleet descended the royal transport. The vehicle was enormous. Unlike human designs, Illyrian engineering favored elegant curves and organic structures. The transport looked less like a machine and more like a gigantic metallic creature gliding through the atmosphere. As it approached, Ethan finally saw Queen Lyra. She stood on an elevated observation platform near the front of the vessel. At first glance, she appeared human. Then he noticed the long, elegant ears extending through her silver hair. She carried herself with effortless confidence, the kind possessed only by rulers who commanded entire star systems. "Well," Ethan muttered, "that's probably the most important person I've ever seen." The technician beside him nodded. "Try not to embarrass humanity." "No promises." The Queen's arrival was connected to a newly discovered energy deposit beneath the canyon. Scientists believe the crystals hidden below Kalon-7 could power cities for centuries. Everything proceeded smoothly for nearly an hour, then the ground exploded. Deep rumble rolled through the canyon. Warning alarms erupted across the colony. The Queen's transport suddenly tilted. Engineers shouted. Pilots screamed into communication channels. Several hundred meters beneath the vehicle, an ancient cavern system collapsed without warning. The massive transport dropped into a newly formed depression in the ground. Dust rose like a storm cloud. Emergency crews rushed toward the scene. Ethan arrived minutes later. The situation was worse than expected. The transport had become wedged between fractured rock formations. One side rested against a collapsed ridge, while the lower hull had sunk deep into unstable terrain. Recovery drones surrounded the vehicle. Nothing worked. Powerful tractor beams failed. Heavy lifting mechs failed. Even military engineering units couldn't move. It's too heavy," one engineer said. "Any additional force could damage the hull." Nearby, Queen Lyra calmly observed the operation despite the growing tension. Ethan found that impressive. If his personal transport had just fallen into a giant hole, he would probably be panicking or crying, possibly both. Hours passed. The rescue effort stalled. Then another section of rock shifted Loud crack echoed through the canyon. The transport sank even deeper. The gathered crowd fell silent. For the first time, concern appeared on the Queen's face. Ethan stared at the trapped vehicle, then at the rocks, then back at the vehicle. An idea formed, a very stupid idea. Historically, his ideas tended to fall into that category. "Don't," his coworker immediately said. "I haven't even spoken." "I know that look." Ethan stepped toward the wreckage. Anyway. Around him, hundreds of eyes followed his movement. Above them all, the enormous transport creaked as another section of stone began to collapse beneath its immense weight. The fractured ground groaned beneath the trapped royal transport. Chunks of stone continued breaking away from the edge of the collapse zone, tumbling into the darkness below. Warning sirens echoed across the canyon, while engineers argued through open communication channels. "Stabilizers are losing balance. Increase tractor beam output." "We already tried that." "Then try it harder." "That isn't how physics works." Ethan listened to the exchange while climbing over a pile of shattered rock. His supervisor spotted him immediately. "Cole," Ethan froze. "What?" "Get away from there." "I'm helping." "Every time you say that, paperwork appears." A few nearby workers laughed. Unfortunately, Ethan continued forward. The closer he got to the transport, the larger it seemed. Standing beside it felt like standing beneath a skyscraper that had decided to lie down for a nap. The royal vehicle was partially embedded inside the collapsed terrain. Massive sections of the lower hull were trapped beneath layers of compressed rock. Several recovery mechs attempted to pull it free. Nothing happened. The vehicle didn't move even a centimeter. Queen Lyra stood on a nearby command platform, observing the operation. Her silver hair moved gently in the canyon wind. The elegant lines of her long ears made her easy to identify even among dozens of guards and advisors. She appeared calm, but Ethan noticed something others probably missed. Her eyes kept returning to the transport. Not because of its value. Because people were still inside. Crew members, royal attendants, pilots. No immediate danger threatened them, but if the terrain continued collapsing, that could change very quickly. The realization made Ethan stop smiling. A second tremor shook the canyon. A loud, metallic groan echoed from the transport. Several engineers cursed. One of the support pillars beneath the trapped hull snapped. The transport dropped another few centimeters. That tiny movement caused immediate panic. Structural stress increasing. "We're running out of time." Ethan looked at the trapped section, then at the nearest recovery mech, then back at the transport. His brain suggested an idea. His common sense attempted to stop it. His brain won. He climbed down into the collapse zone. "What is he doing?" Someone shouted. "No idea." "Should we stop him?" "Probably." Nobody managed to reach him before he arrived beside the trapped hole. The transport towered above him. Dust drifted through the air. The entire canyon seemed to hold its breath. Ethan placed both hands against the metallic surface. Several engineers stared. One guard blinked. Another guard looked genuinely confused. Queen Lyra narrowed her eyes. Ethan looked upward. "This is definitely the stupidest thing I've done this month." Then he pushed. Nothing happened. Several people immediately looked relieved. "See," his supervisor shouted, "physics still Exists, Ethan grunted, the rock beneath. His boots cracked, his muscles tightened, a strange sensation spread through his body, warm, powerful, unfamiliar. It felt as though something deep inside him had suddenly awakened, not pain, not effort, something else, something ancient. His heartbeat thundered, the world seemed sharper, clearer. For a brief moment he could hear individual conversations hundreds of meters away. Then the impossible happened. The transport moved only slightly, but it moved. Silence exploded across the canyon. Nobody spoke, nobody breathed. Several engineers stared at their scanners as if the devices had personally betrayed them. Ethan felt his eyes widen. Oh! The transport shifted again. A loud crack echoed through the trapped rock formations. Dust cascaded from the hull. Nearby recovery crews stumbled backward. The vehicle was rising slowly, but undeniably, the canyon erupted into chaos. Impossible. Scanner malfunction. Check the readings. I checked them. Check them again. Queen Lyra stepped forward for the first time since arriving on Kalon 7. Genuine shock appeared on her face. Ethan barely noticed. Every muscle in his body should have been screaming. Instead, he felt strangely stable, as though his body considered lifting a multi-ton royal transport, a perfectly reasonable activity which was deeply concerning. I have questions, he muttered. Transport rose another few centimeters. Recovery teams immediately reacted. Support vehicles rushed forward. Stabilization systems activated. Engineers began shouting orders. Within seconds, powerful lifting equipment finally gained enough clearance to secure the trapped vessel. The operation that had failed for hours suddenly succeeded. As soon as the transport became stable, Ethan released it. The enormous vehicle settled safely onto reinforced supports. The canyon became silent once more. Ethan took one step backward, then another. Then he looked around. Thousands of eyes were staring directly at him. His supervisor opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Ethan pointed awkwardly toward the transport. So he cleared his throat. Good news, the vehicle seems less stuck now. Nobody laughed. Queen Lyra simply stared at him, speechless. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then the entire canyon exploded into noise. Engineers shouted over one another. Military personnel demanded recordings. Scientists ran toward their scanners as if the devices might escape. Several news drones that had been covering the Queen's visit suddenly abandoned every other subject and focused entirely on Ethan. Unfortunately for Ethan, he was still standing in the middle of the collapse zone. Can I go home now? He asked. Nobody answered. A security officer approached first, then another, then 6 more. Ethan raised both hands. I'd like to officially state that I have no idea what just happened. One officer blinked. You lifted the royal transport, right? Besides that, the officer seemed unsure how to continue the conversation. A short distance away, Queen Lyra finally descended from the command platform. The crowd immediately parted for her. Even the chaos seemed quieter in her presence. Ethan had seen recordings of alien royalty before. None of them prepared him for meeting one in person. She moved with calm confidence, her silver hair flowing behind her in the evening wind. The elegant shape of her long ears made her appearance unmistakably alien despite her otherwise human features. She stopped directly in front of him. For several seconds, neither spoke. Thousands watched, thousands listened. Ethan suddenly became aware that he was covered in dust. A lot of dust, possibly enough dust to qualify as geological property. Finally, the Queen spoke. "How did you do that?" Ethan considered the question carefully. Then he shrugged. "I pushed several." Nearby scientists looked personally offended by the answer. The Queen stared at him. "You lifted over 300 tons. I was having a productive afternoon." One of the royal guards accidentally laughed before immediately pretending not to. To Ethan's surprise, the corner of Lyra's mouth twitched slightly, not quite a smile but close. Before anyone could continue the conversation, a group of scientists arrived carrying scanners. Lots of scanners, far too many scanners. Ethan immediately became suspicious. One elderly researcher pointed a device toward him. Another scanned his eyes. Third scanned his heartbeat. A fourth appeared to be scanning his shoes. "What are you doing?" Ethan asked. "Gathering data." "Why are you scanning my boots?" The scientist paused. "Good question." Meanwhile, throughout the galaxy, footage of the impossible rescue had already begun spreading through communication networks. Within hours, the recording appeared on military channels, scientific forums, commercial broadcasts, and private data networks. The same video played repeatedly. Human placing his hands against a trapped royal transport, a human lifting it, a human accomplishing something that should have been impossible. Back at the colony, Ethan found himself escorted to a temporary research facility established inside one of the Queen's support ships. The room assigned to him looked more like a luxury apartment than a laboratory, which would have been comforting if it weren't filled with monitoring equipment. A wall-sized display continuously tracked his vital signs. Another displayed genetic information. A third showed skeletal scans. Ethan sat on the bed and stared at them. "I feel like a very expensive pet." The door opened. Queen Lyra entered. Alone, no guards, no advisors, just her. That surprised him. The Queen glanced at the displays. "They've been studying the data for hours and they're confused." Ethan laughed. "Good. I'd hate to be confused alone." For the first time, Lyra smiled openly. The expression transformed her normally regal appearance into something warmer, more approachable. The moment passed quickly. Her attention shifted toward the genetic display. What if this changes everything humans know about themselves? Ethan followed her gaze. Rows of genetic sequences moved across the screen. Millions of symbols, millions of answers or questions. "I fix mining equipment," Ethan said. "You're asking the wrong person." Perhaps. Her voice became quieter. "But I think the right person may be sitting in this room." Before Ethan could respond, alarms suddenly appeared across the displays. Several new notifications flashed red. The door burst open. Scientists rushed inside. Their expressions had changed. The confusion was gone. Now they looked shocked. One researcher held a data tablet with trembling hands. "We found something." The room became silent. "What?" Lyra asked. The scientist swallowed hard. "It isn't just his strength." Everyone stared. The researcher looked directly at Ethan. "There's something inside your genome that shouldn't exist." The words hung heavily in the air. Outside the ship, 3 moons continued, crossing the night sky above Kalon 7. Inside, for the first time, Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. Because the scientist didn't sound excited, he sounded afraid. The room remained silent for several long seconds. Ethan looked from the frightened scientist to the genetic display floating above the laboratory console. Rows of symbols continued scrolling endlessly across the screen. He had no idea what any of them meant. Unfortunately, everyone else seemed to, which was somehow worse. Queen Lyra folded her arms. Explain. The scientist swallowed. His species possessed gray skin and 4 eyes, but at that moment he looked just as nervous as any human. We've compared Ethan's genome against every known human database. And Lyra asked, we found sequences that shouldn't be active. Ethan leaned back in his chair. I don't know enough science to be worried by that sentence. You should be. Excellent, the scientist enlarged. Several sections of genetic code. Complex holographic structures appeared above the table. Normally, Ethan would have ignored such things. Tonight, however, something strange happened. The symbols looked familiar, not familiar enough to understand, just familiar enough to bother him. He frowned. For a brief moment he thought he recognized a repeating pattern. Then it vanished. The sensation left him unsettled. One of the researchers noticed. Did you understand any of that? Ethan immediately shook his head. No. A pause, maybe. Every scientist in the room froze. You recognize something. I didn't say that. You literally just did. Then I would like to formally change my answer. Nobody laughed. The scientists were too busy staring. The room suddenly fell. Smaller hours passed. Addition. Experts arrived from orbit, then from neighboring systems, then from planets Ethan had never heard of. By midnight, the royal vessel contained more scientists than soldiers. One hallway had become so crowded with researchers that a security officer accidentally entered a conference room and was mistaken for a genetic specialist. Nobody noticed for 20 minutes. Meanwhile, Ethan was subjected to every medical examination imaginable. Blood scans, neural scans, cellular scans, quantum resonance scans. One machine examined him using particles that apparently existed slightly outside conventional reality. Ethan stopped asking questions after that. The answers only made things worse. By early morning, he finally escaped the laboratories, at least temporarily. The observation deck of the royal ship overlooked the vast canyon below. The colony lights glittered beneath the darkness. Far above, countless stars filled the sky. Ethan leaned against the railing. For the first time since lifting the transport, he was alone, or so he thought. Soft footsteps approached. Queen Lyra appeared beside him. For several moments, neither spoke. The silence felt comfortable, unexpectedly comfortable. You seem calmer than everyone else. Ethan finally said, I am not calm. You hide it well. Lyra looked toward the stars. My advisors are discussing political consequences. Because I lifted a vehicle. Because you may represent something much larger. That answer lingered between them. Ethan understood what she meant. Scientists weren't interested in him anymore. They were interested in what he might mean for humanity, for the galaxy. That was a much heavier burden than any transport. Honestly, Ethan said, I prefer repairing mining drones. The Queen smiled slightly. I believe that. A notification suddenly appeared on her wrist communicator. Her expression changed. Not fear, concern, real concern. She activated the display. Several reports appeared. Scientific reports. Emergency priority. Lyra read them quickly, then read them again. Ethan noticed. What happened? The Queen hesitated. That worried him more than the answer. Finally, she turned the screen toward him. One sentence had been highlighted. Genetic sequence identified in ancient human archaeological records. Ethan blinked. What does that mean? The Queen looked directly into his eyes. It means your DNA may be older than human civilization. The words sounded ridiculous. Impossible. Yet nobody in the scientific community appeared willing to dismiss them. At that exact moment, another alert appeared, then another, then another. Researchers from different worlds were sending identical messages. Ancient records, ancient artifacts, ancient human myths, all pointing toward the same thing. Something hidden, something forgotten, something buried within humanity long before modern history began. Far below the ship, the winds of Keelan 7 swept through the canyon. Far above, countless stars watched silently, and for the first time Ethan realized this story had never been about a trapped vehicle. That impossible moment had merely opened a door someone or something had sealed thousands of years ago. And now it was beginning to open again. For the next 3 days, Ethan learned an important lesson. The galaxy's greatest scientists became extremely dangerous when they stopped sleeping. The royal vessel transformed into a floating research center. Laboratories operated continuously. New experts arrived every hour. Entire sections of the ship were converted into analysis chambers filled with holographic displays and quantum processors. Everywhere Ethan went, someone wanted a sample, blood sample, neural sample, muscle sample. One scientist even requested a hair sample while Ethan was eating breakfast. You already took one yesterday. We need another. Did the first one escape? The scientists failed to appreciate the joke. Most of them didn't, fortunately. Queen Lyra did. She happened to witness the exchange while entering the dining hall and nearly smiled before regaining her royal composure. Nearly, Ethan counted that as a victory. Unfortunately, the scientists eventually found something far more interesting than his terrible jokes. They found evidence, real evidence, ancient evidence, deep within forgotten human archives. Stored on Earth, researchers uncovered fragmented records older than any known civilization. Most of the files were damaged. Many had been corrupted beyond recovery. Yet the surviving fragments all shared one disturbing detail: the same genetic sequence, the same sequence now active inside Ethan. When the reports arrived, the atmosphere aboard the ship changed immediately. The excitement disappeared. Curiosity became concern, because ancient records could be wrong. Ancient DNA records could not. Late that evening, Ethan found himself inside the main research chamber with Queen Lyra and dozens of specialists gathered around a massive holographic display. A rotating image of human DNA floated above the room. Sections glowed in gold. Most of the genome remained. Blue, the golden sections represented the anomaly, the impossible part. One elderly researcher enlarged a specific sequence. We've never seen anything like this. Another scientist nodded. It appears dormant in almost every human we've scanned. Ethan frowned. Wait. The room became quiet, dormant in everyone. The scientists exchanged glances. Finally, one answered. Possibly. A strange feeling settled over the room. If they were correct, then Ethan wasn't unique. He was simply the first. That idea somehow felt more significant than lifting a transport. Queen Lyra stepped closer to the holographic display. Her silver hair reflected the golden light. What activated it? No one knows. A scientist replied. Environmental trigger unknown. Stress response unknown. Biological adaptation unknown. Ethan raised a hand. The scientist sighed. Yes. Have you considered that my DNA simply enjoys causing problems? Several people laughed. The tension eased slightly, only slightly. The lead researcher touched another control. A new image appeared, this one silenced everyone. The display showed an ancient underground structure buried beneath kilometers of Antarctic ice. Humanity had discovered the site decades earlier but dismissed it as a natural formation. New analysis suggested otherwise. The structure possessed geometric patterns impossible to create naturally. Even more disturbing, the architecture matched symbols found within the ancient genetic records. Ethan stared at the image. A strange sensation returned. The same sensation he'd felt while looking at his genetic code. Recognition, not understanding. Recognition, as though some forgotten part of his mind knew exactly what he was seeing. The feeling lasted only seconds, then it vanished. He looked away. Queen Lyra noticed. So did I. The voice came from behind them. Everyone turned. A younger scientist stood near one of the consoles. What? The scientist swallowed. When I looked at the structure, he hesitated. I felt like I'd seen it before. The room became silent again. One scientist could be coincidence. Two was concerning, especially because the younger researcher was human. Hours later, after most of the meeting ended, Ethan and Lyra stood alone near the observation deck. The stars drifted beyond the transparent hull. For a while neither spoke, then Lyra finally broke the silence. I think we're looking at something much older than anyone imagined. Ethan nodded slowly. Ancient civilization. Perhaps lost human empire. Perhaps ancient humans who buried giant mysteries and left future generations with impossible genetic surprises. The Queen looked at him. Definitely, perhaps. Ethan laughed, but the humor faded quickly because deep down he knew something had changed. The mystery was no longer centered on him. It was becoming centered on humanity itself, and somewhere beneath the ice of Earth, a structure forgotten by history had waited thousands of years, waiting for someone or something to remember it existed. 2 weeks later, a fleet unlike anything assembled in recent history entered Earth's orbit. Human research vessels, Illyrian royal ships, scientific cruisers from half a dozen civilizations. Every major government wanted answers. Every scientist wanted access. Every historian wanted to be the first person Proven wrong, the destination lay beneath Antarctica, buried beneath kilometers of ice waiting. Ethan stood inside the observation deck of the flagship as Earth slowly rotated. Below, the sight never became ordinary. Blue oceans, white clouds, the familiar shape of home. Queen Lyra stood beside him. Neither spoke for several moments. Eventually, Ethan pointed toward the planet. Do you think whatever is down there is dangerous? The Queen considered the question. Yes. Ethan nodded. I appreciate honesty. You asked. That was my first mistake. Faint smile appeared on her face. It happened more often now, not frequently, but enough for Ethan to notice. Fleet descended through Earth's atmosphere several hours later. The Antarctic base had already been expanded into a massive scientific complex. Thousands of personnel worked around the clock. Heavy excavation drones moved across the ice. Orbital scanners continuously mapped the buried structure below. The moment Ethan arrived, researchers surrounded him again. He was beginning to suspect scientists could smell him from orbit. One researcher handed him a tablet. Another handed him a scanner. A third attempted to attach sensors to his arm while he was still walking. Good morning, Ethan said. We need your help. It is not a good morning, the scientist blinked. Why not? Because you're carrying sensors. The scientist reluctantly admitted he had a point. Several kilometers beneath the ice, excavation efforts had finally revealed the upper surface of the buried structure. The first images stunned everyone. The structure wasn't a ruin. It was intact, perfectly intact. Not a single wall had collapsed, not a single corridor appeared damaged. The surface possessed a metallic sheen unlike any known material. Even after thousands of years, it looked newly constructed. That fact alone terrified several experts. Technology should age. Everything aged, apparently. This place disagreed. Later that afternoon, a meeting was held. Inside the command center, hundreds of specialists filled the room. Holographic projections displayed the structure from every angle. The chamber resembled an underground city, massive, ancient, impossible. One archaeologist enlarged a section near the center. We believe this is the primary access point. Another scientist nodded. It resembles a transportation hub. A third shook his head. Or a military installation. The argument continued for nearly 20 minutes. Ethan eventually raised his hand. Everyone looked at him. I have no qualifications whatsoever. The room became quiet. Thank you for clarifying. You're welcome. Several people laughed. Even the exhausted scientists needed the break. The laughter disappeared moments later when a technician rushed into the room. His face was pale. We activated something. Silence. Every conversation stopped. The technician approached the main display. His hands shook slightly. What do you mean activated? The answer appeared on the holographic screen. Energy readings, massive energy readings. The buried structure had awakened after thousands of years. Deep vibration rolled through the facility. The floor trembled. Warning. Alarms immediately activated. Outside, excavation vehicles halted. Inside the ice beneath them, something enormous was moving. The entire command center erupted into chaos. Scientists rushed toward consoles. Security teams moved into position. Communication channels exploded with reports. Then the strangest thing happened. Every screen in the facility went dark for 1 second, 2, 3. Then new symbols appeared, ancient symbols, unknown symbols, symbols nobody recognized except Ethan. The moment he saw them, a shock ran through his body. Images flashed through his mind, bright cities, strange stars, towering structures, memories not his memories, yet somehow familiar. He staggered backward. Queen Lyra immediately caught his arm. Ethan. He stared at the screen, his heartbeat thundered. The symbols no longer looked unfamiliar, they looked readable. Impossible yet true. The room watched as his expression changed. What does it say? Lyra asked softly. Ethan swallowed. The words emerged. Before he realized, he understood them. They're not warnings. The room became silent. Everyone stared. What are they? A scientist whispered. Ethan continued looking at the screen. Chill ran through him because he understood every symbol now, every single one. And Snorts, the message was directed specifically at humanity, not to visitors, not to explorers, to humanity. He slowly read the first line aloud. Welcome back. The silence that followed felt heavier than any weight he had ever lifted. The words echoed through the command center. Welcome back. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Scientists stared at the ancient symbols covering every display. Military officers looked as though they had suddenly forgotten how to breathe. Even the endless hum of machinery seemed quieter. Ethan wished he could say he understood what was happening. He didn't. Clear his throat. Only difference was that he could somehow read the language. The symbols shifted. New lines appeared. Ancient facility had waited 31,842 years. The ancient facility recognized humanity. The ancient facility confirmed that dormant genetic sequences had been intentionally placed within the human genome. The room erupted into noise. Questions flew in every direction. Who built it? Why hide it? Why wait? The answers arrived slowly. The facility contained an artificial intelligence older than any civilization currently known. It had been created by humanity itself. Not modern humanity. Ancient humanity. A forgotten civilization that had once spread among the stars. The records revealed a truth that changed history forever. Long ago, humanity had become extraordinarily advanced, enhanced intelligence, enhanced strength, enhanced perception, abilities woven directly into their biology. Then came a devastating conflict, not against aliens, against themselves. The enhancements had created division, power had become concentrated, entire worlds had burned. Humanity survived, but barely. The survivors made a decision. They sealed away most of their biological advantages. They erased much of their own history. They left behind archives and safeguards, and then they started over. The dormant genes remained hidden, waiting until future generations were mature enough to rediscover them responsibly. For days the galaxy watched as the archives were translated. The revelations shook governments. Many feared humanity, others feared the technology, some feared both. Yet as more information emerged, panic slowly faded. The ancient humans had not left weapons. They had left warnings. Warnings about pride, warnings about power, warnings about forgetting compassion. The message was surprisingly simple. Strength meant nothing without wisdom. Weeks later, additional genetic awakenings began appearing throughout human populations, not armies, not super soldiers, ordinary people. A doctor whose memory became extraordinary, an engineer capable of solving impossible problems, a rescue worker whose strength suddenly surpassed expectations. The abilities differed from person to person. No two awakenings were exactly alike. Humanity did not become conquerors, they became more capable versions of themselves, exactly as the ancient records intended. Months passed, political tensions eased, new alliances formed, scientific cooperation expanded across dozens of worlds. The discovery that once threatened division instead brought civilizations together. The galaxy had expected humanity's hidden power to become a weapon. Instead, it became a responsibility. One evening, Ethan stood atop a balcony, overlooking the rebuilt colony on Kylon 7, the same colony where everything had begun. The canyon stretched endlessly beneath the stars. Beside him stood Queen Lyra. Neither had spoken for several minutes. Comfortable silence had become surprisingly common between them. "You changed the galaxy," Lyra finally said. Ethan laughed. "No. You did. I moved a vehicle, a very large vehicle." "Still a vehicle." The Queen shook her head. There was warmth in her eyes now, not the distant formality of a ruler. Something deeper. "You were the first." Ethan looked toward the horizon. Perhaps she was right. Months earlier, he would have run from such responsibility. He had spent most of his life avoiding attention, avoiding leadership, avoiding significance. Now he understood something important. Being important wasn't about seeking power, it was about accepting responsibility when circumstances demanded it. The realization had changed him, not completely. He was still himself, still sarcastic, still uncomfortable around scientists, still suspicious of anyone carrying genetic scanners. But he was no longer the same man who repaired mining drones and expected nothing more from life. Far below, lights from the colony shimmered across the canyon. Celebration had been underway for hours. Humans and aliens filled the streets. Together, the future felt different now. Larger, brighter, hopeful. A communication drone suddenly approached the balcony. A journalist appeared on its display. "Ethan Cole, one final question." Ethan groaned. The journalist smiled. "How does it feel knowing you became the symbol of humanity's forgotten legacy?" He glanced toward Lyra, then toward the stars, then back toward the drone. His answer came easily. "Honestly." The journalist nodded. "I was just trying to help get a stuck vehicle out of a hole." For a moment there was silence. Then the drone operator laughed. The journalist laughed. People below laughed. Even Queen Lyra laughed. And beneath a sky full of stars, surrounded by a future no one could have imagined, Ethan found himself smiling. Not because humanity had rediscovered its forgotten potential. Not because ancient mysteries had finally been solved, but because sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with one ordinary decision to help someone in need, and that he thought was a piece of human history worth remembering.